I've been having some issues with my Toyota FJ Cruiser. I believe I've got a bad front wheel bearing. I've already done the other side, but I'm going to go through all the steps on how to change this wheel bearing on a two-wheel drive Toyota FJ Cruiser. This should apply as well to a Tacoma or a 4Runner of similar year model. So let me show you what we got going on. I've got all the parts and tools that we're going to need to do this bearing replacement on a two-wheel drive FJ Cruiser. If you do have a four-wheel drive unit, some of your part numbers are going to be a little bit different. The methods are probably very similar, and I'll explain those differences to you as we're doing this repair. We're going to start with over here on the right side. You're going to need some 400-degree sandpaper, and that's going to be just to kind of polish up some of those contact surfaces. I recommend some type of rubber gloves. Brake cleaner, you're going to need some shop towels. On your wrench set, you're going to need a 17 millimeter. I recommend getting a little bit longer if you've got extended 17 millimeters. This isn't the longest that they offer. The longer, the better. I'm going to be using half-inch tools. I'm not using any power tools, so I can show you that you can do this in your driveway, in your garage. So we're going to use this half-inch wrench here. We're going to get a long extension and a short extension. The 21 millimeter, this is to take your lug nuts off. We've got a 12 millimeter because we're going to be moving a brake line bracket out of the way, and a 17 millimeter. You're going to need a 5 millimeter Allen wrench, and that's going to be to take the wheel speed sensor out. I've got a tool that I've fabricated here to hang that brake caliper out of the way. I recommend a sharp pin tool so you can remove the electric connector to that wheel sensor. Some Loctite. I like to use Loctite Blue. This is a 3-pound sledgehammer, and that's because some of these bolts are going to be very tight, and like I mentioned, we're going to be using hand tools only to do this in the driveway. Get yourself a really good jack and a jack stand, because you're going to have to take the wheel completely off and get it out of the way. And then this is the bearing that we're going to be putting on. This is not the factory bearing, but I do recommend getting a full hub assembly because this is already pressed together, ready to go in. That part number for this vehicle is a 515203 by Moog, if that's the brand that you want to use. They do have other brands for that, so if you're wanting to use a more expensive brand, or even if you want to use factory, you can at least watch these steps on how you do this. And I'm going to be changing out that speed sensor, and this is specific to each side. So I've already put the other one in, but this is the ALS 684, and this is by standard. The very first things that you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to loosen these lug nuts before you jack the vehicle up. It's a lot easier when you have weight here on these to loosen this up. I've already done that with my 21 millimeter. Again, you're going to have to put some force behind this to make this happen. If you've got a T-wrench, or if you want to use the factory lug nut wrench, you could do that. So again, we're not using power tools. So just showing you how you can do this in your driveway without power tools. Now we're ready to jack the vehicle up. I like to go right behind this cross beam is where I'm going to jack this up. And I like to use a bottle jack because this vehicle is a little bit higher off the ground. So most of the time a scissor jack won't get this up to the height that you need. And you could use the factory bottle jack, but I bought this one that's a little bit bigger and it can go a little bit higher than the factory jack can. Now that I've got the vehicle jacked up, I'm going to put my jack stand under here. I'm going to leave it on the jack because I've got it high enough to get this tire off. Once I get the tire off, then I'm going to lower it down to my jack stand. My jack stand is not tall enough to touch the frame right here. You can certainly get taller jack stands, and definitely do not work on it while it's just sitting on the jack itself. I'm doing this just to get the tire off. Then I'm going to lower it down onto this jack stand before we start any work. We've got the tire off, we've got it resting on the jack stand, and we've got a little bit of pressure on the jack so we can bring this down and have a good surface so this thing isn't going to be moving around on us. First bolt we got to take out is this 12 millimeter here that holds the brake line assembly. So we're going to take that out in preparation for when we get this caliper off. We're going to have to move and hang it out of the way. The next step we got to do is loosen these pads up a little bit. You've got two options. You can try to spread the pads out a little bit, maybe relax them out, or you can take these pins out right here, and you can pull the brake pads completely out. That would be the easiest way, but I always just try to take my wrench, lay it across there, and I'm pushing on this piece here where I'm just pulling it a little bit outward, and then I'll do the same the other way where I'm pushing here, pivoting, and pushing against the other one, and that will open those out enough where I can take this whole assembly off. All right, from the back side of the brake caliper, the two bolts that you're taking off, one is here and the other one is right here. and that is a 17 millimeter. So I'm going to use my ratcheting wrench, and you may also have to use your box end wrench on that right there. Before we loosen that caliper, I'm going to go ahead and hang my bracket right here. Once we have this loose, we're going to hang this by a part of the metal on this caliper. Don't hang it by the brake line, and don't just let it just hang there. Otherwise, you could have a busted brake line. These bolts are going to be on there very tight. So this is where that sledgehammer comes in. Get your wrench on there. Make sure you're going the proper direction. And for this one, I've got to tap it this way. And you may have to tap it like that to get this loose. Otherwise, you need an extension or a breaker bar on the end of your wrench. I have both bolts out. We're going to slide the caliper, and we're just going to turn it like that. And we're going to hang it on that hook that we put right there on the frame. Now that the brake caliper is out of the way, I'm going to rotate this bearing so you can hear this is definitely our problem bearing. We shouldn't hear any noises like that, and it's definitely locking up on us right there. So we know we're doing the right repair here. Like I mentioned, I've already swapped the other side, and it wasn't really bad, but since this one's already gone out, we're taking the precaution and changing both of these. Okay, the next step we're on is you've got 4 17 millimeter bolts holding this whole assembly on. If you can see, since this is a 2-wheel drive, I do not have an axle coming through this. So if you had the 2-wheel drive, you'd have a CV axle, you'd have to remove an axle nut and a cotter key right here. And there's going to be a dust cap that goes over that. Again, since this is 2-wheel drive, we don't have that. If you did have a 4-wheel drive though, you'll have to take a sharp chisel, get that cap off without damaging it. And then you got to take that axle nut off, and the key that's in there, the cotter key. The axle nut, I believe, is a 36 millimeter. This being the 2-wheel drive, this one's definitely easier to do. This is where your longer 17 millimeter wrench comes in. This is not the longest. You can definitely get one longer. This makes it easier. But I set that up, making sure you're going the correct direction, and you're going to tap on your 17 millimeter, and then it'll break that bolt loose for you. Do that on all 4, and then this hub assembly should come out. I got lucky on the other side, and this assembly just kind of came right out. If you make sure all these bolts are loose, now they're not going to come all the way out because you're going to be hitting the back side of this. That's why I recommend getting an entire assembly with the bolts already in there for you. So if yours isn't coming out, you're going to want to tap on the back or tap on this section here, and you're going to try to just get it to kind of start wiggling out as you start tapping on that, and eventually it'll come loose. All right, as you can see, all this debris from the bearing is inside here. That's another reason why I recommend replacing this speed sensor as well. There's a magnetic piece on the back of this hub that's reading the speed through this sensor. So we may have gotten some kind of debris and dirt all over this. I'm going to keep these. These are the factory sensors. So when we go to clean all this out, I'm going to take this out before we clean this area. I'll show you the inside portion of that bearing, and you can see all those pieces of metal that have stuck to this housing here. So we're definitely going to throw this out. We're going to put the new one in. Before I do that, I'm going to clean all this up and show you that process. All right, we're going to take the brake sensor plug out. You're going to use your sharp tool there and go in from the front piece here, and we're bending out that little tab. And at the same time we're doing that, we're going to pull out on that. So this will take this sensor plug off. Be very careful. You can break these. These do get brittle. This vehicle has over 300,000 miles on it, so you do need to be careful there. You could break that. This bolt right here, you're going to take a 5 millimeter Allen head and just loosen that and save this bolt because you'll have to put it back in on the new one. All right, before we start cleaning this out with our brake cleaner, you want to just get all this loose debris, put a paper towel underneath here, and then just keep scrubbing this out so the big stuff, the majority of the big stuff is coming out of there before you start with your brake cleaner. All right, if you haven't already, you're definitely going to want your rubber gloves on at this time. Otherwise, you're going to get this stuff all over you. Now, I like to put something down on my driveway. So this is really just a piece of paper that's going to soak up some of this brake cleaner and some of this oil and stuff that's going to be dripping down. So if you hadn't done that, this would be a good time to do that. And I'm just going to take my brake cleaner like I showed you at the start of the video. We're going to douse this and let it sit for a few minutes. We'll go back over it a couple times. Let that cleaner pressure kind of take care of some of the original stuff there, and then you can come back and wipe it out. The next piece you also want to clean is this dust shield. Keep in mind the way that this came off is going to go back on like this. So you want to clean mainly this surface contact where that bearing is going back on, and also on the back contact surface. So I'm going to spray that down and scrub this as well. This is where your 400 grit sandpaper comes into play. And I'm going to just polish up this face surface and a little bit on the inside right here, just so the bearing will go in nice and easy, and then we won't have any issues with it locking up inside there. All right, now that you've got that surface rust sanded off, you're going to do one more scrub, and this will be your final scrub with your brake cleaner. Okay, I'm going to put the wheel sensor back in, and I recommend putting a little bit of grease on that O-ring right there. Otherwise, it's not going to go in there as easy. These are side specific, so if you've got the wrong side, it would be going like that, or the bolt hole would be on the bottom there, and you'd be facing the plug the opposite direction. So this is the correct orientation here. And remember how I said put that grease there? It'll let that push in a little bit easier. I did put Loctite blue on this bolt. You can do red if you would like, or anything else that you have, but I do recommend putting some sort of Loctite on that. And this is your 5mm Allen head. You're going to tighten that up pretty much till you feel it stop. Don't over torque though, because you could break this. There is at least a brass bushing in here, so you can't crack the sensor right here, but just give yourself a little bit of a torque on that, and then you can plug this sensor back in. We're ready to install the new hub assembly, and don't forget to put your dust shield back on. And a couple little things to make sure you get this line back up right. There's a dimple here and a dimple here that line up with this and this. Remember, your brake caliper goes here. There are two ways you can put this on, but you'll know right away that you put it on wrong, or you'll at least know once you try to put that brake caliper on. Don't forget to put this on right here though, because if you forget to put this on and you start reassembling that hub, then you got to take it back off to put this dust cover back on. So the bolts on the hub assembly already come with Loctite red on them. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. If it did not, I recommend putting Loctite red on this portion. It's easier to put your hub assembly on the dust cover first and then try to line it up into the vehicle like that, making sure your plate is lined up and making sure that you can tighten these hand tight. Once you've got those hand tight, take your 17mm wrench and you're going to tighten this in a crisscross pattern, just like you would putting lug nuts on the vehicle. So get them snug, go in that crisscross pattern, and then you're going to do your final tightening here in just a minute. Once you've got that as tight as you can get it, this is where I like to take my sledgehammer here, and I like to put the box end side on that 17mm, and I like to tap the open end side here until I don't see any more movement, and that makes sure I have this as tight as I can go. Remember, we're doing it this way. We're using all hand tools. We're doing this in the driveway, so that's why we're getting it like that. If you did want to have a longer wrench or a breaker bar on here, you could certainly get more leverage, but I've always found that if I tap it with that hammer there, I get it a little bit more tight without having to worry about if it's going to come loose or not. We're ready to put this brake disc back on and the caliper back on. Before I put the caliper back on, what I do with the bolts is I'll go ahead and put Loctite blue on those. I'm going to slide it back over there, line up with those back holes, and torque these down. Okay, so what I'll do is once I've got these as tight as I can get them on the brake caliper, I'll do the same thing with my sledgehammer, and I'll give those a little bit of a tap, just making sure that I've got that as tight as I can get it. You don't want these coming loose. That's another reason why you use the Loctite. All right, make sure you don't have any twists or turns in that brake line after you reassembled that. Put this bracket back in that hole, and then put that 12mm back in. I do put Loctite on that bolt as well. May not be necessary. Like I've mentioned, I don't want any of this stuff coming off. Ready to put that wheel back on. So now I've got to jack the vehicle back up, because remember, once we lower down on the jack stand, this axle is lower than the wheel and tire that I have on this vehicle. So we're going to jack it back up to the proper height and then put that wheel back on. Now that I've got the tire back on, I'm just going to tighten these in a crisscross pattern. Just a little bit of torque there before I drop this down and put any weight on these. So just make sure to do that in the crisscross pattern so this is seating properly. And then once we drop it down, we'll come back and we'll give it a final torque. After you've done that, you're going to want to test drive this vehicle, and probably about after the first 50 miles, you want to re-torque these lug nuts, make sure your wheels are on there tight. Now that the vehicle's on the ground, I'm going to give it my final torque. And again, keep that crisscross pattern. You want to repeat that a couple of times just to make sure that you've tightened all of them. So we have finished up this project on this 2007 FJ Cruiser for the wheel bearing replacement. I went on a test drive and I no longer have the issues I was having. You may be asking, how did I know I had a wheel bearing failure on this vehicle? The first symptoms I was experiencing was a roaring sound from the front half of the vehicle. And how I could tell it was the front is if I steered left or right on the highway, it would get silenced or it would reduce, letting me know it was a front wheel bearing and not a rear wheel bearing. So that may be what you need to use to help figure out if you're having that same symptom as I was having. Don't get confused though, because you could have some tire issues that are causing that roaring sound. So definitely check that out as well, or you could have other suspension or steering components that are causing that problem. For mine though, it was a wheel bearing, and I showed you on that replacement I did here that it was definitely the problem here on the passenger side. It was cheap enough though for me to replace both of those, and I know if this one went out, the other one probably wasn't far behind. Those were the factory Toyota bearings though, and this vehicle has 300,000 miles on it. So they definitely did their service life and beyond. I don't know if I'll get the same with these because these are aftermarket, but again, this vehicle has 300,000 miles and Toyota bearings are quite expensive compared to the models that I used on here. Hopefully this information was useful or helpful, and if it was, please subscribe and share. And that's to the point.